Alright, so hey guys, welcome to another video, and today I want to talk about farming legendaries, because recently I've noticed a lot of people asking about farming legendaries in places like Reddit, but I've also noticed a huge uptick in 3-star legendary sales in my camp. So one of the OG places for farming legendaries, and still one of the better places to farm legendaries actually, is the White Springs, or rather the White Springs Golf Club. This place has been nerfed multiple times, both when it comes to farming legendaries and farming XP, but it is still really good for both. The reason why this place is so good is because you have a ton of enemies in a small area that you can run through very quickly. On top of that, the ghouls are pretty daft, they are not very perceptive, so you can do it with a stealth build as well, and the chances of the ghouls actually sniffing you out of stealth are very low, and the drops aren't too shabby either. The ghouls will for the most part just drop random junk, but from time to time a ghoul will drop like a bunch of chems that you can sell for a decent amount of caps, or use them if your character is set up for it, and every now and then you of course get a legendary. Now there are kind of like two ways you can do this, and the choice is yours. You can either just clear the golf club and then server hop right away to do the golf club again, or you can run through the entirety of White Springs, which I feel is much better, because you spend significantly less time sitting on a loading screen and significantly more time actually doing stuff. So if you want to do the full White Springs run, which once again I feel is preferable, you will exit the golf club the same way you entered it, and you will head left until you run into a path that heads east into a bunch of apartments. Once there, you will just keep heading east through the apartments, slaughtering a ton of ghouls in the process until you make it to the other side of White Springs. Once you run out of apartments to invite yourself into, you will turn right and start heading west until you hit a big parking lot. Here you will find a bunch of extra ghouls to poke. Now once you clear the parking lot, you want to go into the building that's next to the parking lot, where you will find even more ghouls, and once you clear that as well, you want to head southwest-ish until you find some more apartments to invite yourself into, and continue heading west until you make it back to the golf club. And that's it, that's like a full White Springs run, or at least what I consider to be a full White Springs run. I'm pretty sure other people do it differently. The second OG legendary farming place that's still really good for farming both legendaries and XP is the West Tech Research Center. Now this one, depending on your build, can be a little bit more dangerous than the White Springs Golf Club, because you are going to be fighting super mutants, but that mostly applies to stealth builds because there's a little bit more verticality here than in the Golf Club, and verticality can sometimes screw with stealth a little bit. And also, while the super mutants are pretty much just as daft as the ghouls, their hounds are pretty perceptive, so if you're going through as a stealth build, take care of the hounds first. And that is pretty much it, because this route is far more straightforward. So what you do is you simply clear the super mutants in front of West Tech, then head inside and just go through the entire thing. Now this area is great for pretty much the same reasons why the White Spring Golf Club is great, and that is you have a ton of enemies in a relatively small area that you can run through very quickly. But there are some additional benefits here, which is why I prefer it to White Spring. Number one, super mutants drop caps, and while they don't drop a ton of caps, it will add up over time. Number two, max level super mutants will for the most part drop 556 ammo, which is the one used for assault rifles and handmade, so you can make additional caps if you sell them in your camp. And number three, you can collect an enormous amount of weapons that you can scrap for a ridiculous amount of steel and molded plastic if you use the scrapper perk, which gives you more components when you're scrapping weapons and armor. I will usually get somewhere between 400 and 700 steel from a single West Tech run. And this is good for many different reasons, but the main one is ammo production, because if you do this, it basically takes care of all your steel and you can save all your acid for smelting lead. And I suppose number four, though this is a bit of a stretch, their hounds will drop meat, so you can cook it and sustain your food. And somehow I managed to not mention this up until now, but number five, since there's a high density of enemies, there's a good chance you will run into a legendary or two, or sometimes even three. And finally, there is an additional area in West Tech that you can access via this terminal, but while I'm not entirely sure, I think you have to finish the West Tech quest. But it's very much worth it because there's a ton of super mutants here. Moving on to events, which are really good for farming legendaries as well, because a lot of them either have guaranteed legendary spawns or they spawn them very often. So the first one we have here is AWOL Armaments, which is a guaranteed 3-star legendary Gutsy at the very end, and every now and then it spawns an additional legendary Gutsy in the middle. So be a little bit careful with this one because the robots do hurt quite a bit. Up next we have Guided Meditation, which I don't think has a guaranteed legendary spawn, but it will spawn legendary enemies more often than not. It is also a public event, so it will reward you with treasury notes at the end. And the number of legendary enemies that I run into here is between 1 and 3. In at number 3 we have the new Radiation Rumble event, and while this one is pretty brutal and I haven't managed to finish it yet, yet I fail it every single time regardless of how many people show up. The enemy density here is just insane. You will probably fight more enemies here than in the entirety of Scorched Earth. So if you can actually keep the scavengers alive for a decent amount of time, chances are you will run into a few legendaries here. Up next we have the second new event called Riding Shotgun, and I unfortunately started recording a little bit late here, so I'm sorry about that, but it starts on the Cranberry Bog side of the Big Bend Tunnel. And this one is a guaranteed legendary, and I do believe it's a 3-star every time. It's the Blood Eagle Captain about halfway through. And then there is like the ultimate legendary farming event, which is Uranium Fever. And the reason this one is good, even though the legendaries you get from this are generally level 40 or 35, is because you have 3 guaranteed legendary enemies that are going to be between 1 and 3 stars. And I think it's also the only event that announces the presence of a legendary enemy.
Detecting terminated management personnel. Remove this individual from the premises.
If you hear that during Uranium Fever, it means that a legendary enemy has spawned. Now, it would of course be silly to do this video without even mentioning Scorched Earth, which is the Scorched Beast Queen boss fight, which happens when someone nukes Fisher Site Prime in the Cranberry Bog, because on top of any random legendary monsters that will most likely spawn during the event, you get a random legendary from the Queen, and finishing the event gives you a random 2-star combat armor piece as well, and it's overall just a really cool event that you should always try to participate in if you have the gear. Please don't go there at like level 20 because you're gonna make it much harder for everyone else. And now let's go through some honorable mentions as well, starting off with Heart of the Swamp. Now this is a public event, so it will reward you with treasury nodes at the end. Every now and then one of the enemies in the waves that try to stop you from destroying the Strangler Heart will be a legendary, and the boss at the end can be a legendary too. So overall just a fantastic event that I do every time it pops up. Then there is Monster Mash in Watoga, which doesn't have guaranteed legendary spawns, but it has very high monster density because you're going to be fighting a ton of ghouls here, so the chance of you running into a legendary are pretty high. Also, as you're doing this event, you'll be getting Halloween candy, and if you get 5,000 of it, you can go to this machine and exchange it for a random legendary. Next on the menu, we have the Horde Events, which spawn all over the map, and the reason they are in honorable mentions and not in just the events, because the point of these is to literally just hunt down a legendary, is because a lot of the time the legendaries are very low level. Though if it does spawn in the Cranberry Bog, there is a chance that the legendary will be max level. It's not very high though. And pretty much the same thing goes for Leader of the Pack, which is an extremely low level event in the forest, but it spawns 3 legendaries, which I do believe are always 1 star. So not only are the legendaries gonna be low level, they're also only gonna be 1 star, but you do get 3 of them, which is quite nice, especially if you're a lower level. And the final honorable mention is Project Paradise, which just breaks my heart. Why, you ask? Well, because I really like Project Paradise. I think it's a superb event and people just don't do it. Now I do understand why. I mean, the event is kind of long and it's complicated and it's easy to fail, and the rewards aren't necessarily better than stuff you get from other events, but it's a really fun multi-stage event that will spawn all kinds of legendaries, low level, high level, 1 star, 3 star, just all over the place. The main problem with this event, I think, is that you need people to be there from the very beginning, and too many people jumped in there on their own, failed it, and never want to try it again, so they just don't join. But if you see a group of people actively doing this event, definitely jump in, because on top of all the other stuff you get from this, it is a public event, so you should get treasury nodes. I'm saying should, not will, because I haven't finished it since Wastelanders. And that is pretty much all I wanted to say, so I thank you very much for watching. As always guys, I hope you enjoyed the video and it was helpful, and I will see you some other time. Bye bye.